Hello and good evening, Rebecca.
Hello.
Hello. I'm so excited for us to actually be finally meeting. We connected on socials. I was following you at Chronically Resilient OT, and then we both now are involved in Autistic Revolution. So we thought we would have a chat. Rebecca, you're on the side of sensory, everything sensory. So we thought we would come in, have a chat. What does that mean? What do OTs do? And what can we be looking forward to from your section? So if you want, do you want to go ahead and give yourself a little introduction?
Yeah, sure. So I'm over in New Zealand. It is nighttime while we're recording. Uh, so I'm an occupational therapist. I've got a little private practice. And occupational therapy can be so many different things. So it can be a little hard to explain, but basically I support people to do the things they want and need to do. And whether that's looking at accommodations to change tasks or to, improve people's skills, change environments. It's all about looking at supports and barriers and helping people do the things that really matter to them in a very broad nutshell. And that looks different for every person as well. And then as part of being an occupational therapist, I have I guess I'd call it a special interest in sensory processing and how that can impact our well-being and basically all aspects of lives.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I'm so we're calling this sensory section. I think we agreed on we've come down to sensory explorations as
Ooh,
to what we're going to call it. Yeah,
I love that title because it's true. Sensory is in every activity we do because we're sensory beings and it's
yeah,
in everything. So even I was
yeah,
hearing that with you explaining what you do, I imagine it's incredibly personalized down to each person you work with.
absolutely. So like any being, so everyone all moments of every day is processing sensory information. And we're talking about the eight senses as well. So the standard sight, sound, oh god, I'm not them off. Sight, sound, touch, hearing, taste are the
Yes.
five that most people know. But then we're talking about vestibular, so our balance and proprioception, where we are in space, and interoception, so an understanding of our body's internal signals, thirst, hunger, needing to go to the toilet, emotions comes into. So sensory processing impacts emotion regulation as well. There's a really interesting crossover there.
That's been, I think, like the biggest light bulb moment for me personally with my kids and professionally. And I say to people, how did I get through so much health education and working and had never heard of interoception? Like it was just never there. So that has been a huge game changer of recognizing, well, of course, there has to be some sort of sense of understanding what's happening inside of me. How else do I know? So tuning into that has been a really interesting journey. Like, and to use your word, the exploration and realizing where I struggle or where I feels too much information, too little information has been a really fascinating few years.
Yeah. And some people, like especially with trauma histories, they have cut off their interoception for safety reasons, or it can happen with chronic pain as well. Like you don't want to tune into your body. Interoceptive exercises to enhance that awareness can actually be really painful. So there's wonderful work happening in interoception, but we also need to come at, well, all of this from a trauma informed perspective in what we're doing, like some senses, especially smell bulb sits like right near our memory center. And
Right.
so if you're trialing different scents with somebody, you want to just be aware that there are potential trauma triggers in any of the things you're doing. Some people love weighted blankets, and for some people it feels trapped. And whether that's a trauma thing or not, it might not be, but just being aware of the range of responses
Right.
and being, people like talk about sensory, and it's everyone's kind of talking about at the moment, but I think important to know that it's not just something to go in gung-ho about, that there's actually some safety to consider as well.
I think that's a really important point to make, because if someone's not ready to process that in that moment, and they're coming in for a session. So what would be then, I'm just a bit curious, like what would be then if you weren't sure, right? If someone's coming in and they might not be sure that that's going to be the reaction they have. Let's say you do see someone then getting upset. What is your usual, this is me like asking, I guess, as another professional, what do you do in those moments?
Well, probably be that, like, I might not go in on that sort of stuff straight away, or relationship and the person's feeling safe in the space, then if a response to something done, it's easier to work with, right? Whereas if I kind of, somebody comes in and I wouldn't just start sensory items at them. I might, if somebody's in a session and they're looking like they're kind of uncomfortable and something, I might have a box of things. But in terms of really starting to explore someone's, I don't love the term sensory diet, mentality. So I'm kind of like I haven't quite settled on what I want to call it instead. When we're looking at what's going to support their regulation, moving, whether they need to have more input to be more alert, or whether they need to kind of bring their levels of arousal down. When we're into those explorations, like, I'd want to have a relationship built before kind of doing some more of that stuff, and asking questions, like, if they already know that there's things that they really do not like, then that's not going to be something that I.
Right. So I hear like lots around safety, like those basics of like attachment and safety, connection, relationships just come up over and over and over again. And I guess if that gives a really nice foundation where if someone starts to step into that, you probably can get that feeling from them that they're starting to go to uncomfortable and help them come back, or they'd be safe enough to tell you, I don't want to do this, versus if they've just met you, they might be thinking, I probably can't tell them no. So I think that's a really big thing with practitioners is, yeah, that relationship always comes first.
Yeah, and having those conversations too, and like letting people know that everyone processes things differently. Like with the weighted blanket example, some people love it, some people cannot stand them, and with or without trauma histories, like just as a preference. And so creating that space where people have permission, because some people really struggle to speak up for themselves, and that if you don't want to try something, you don't have to try something. Like, this is not me trying to force something on somebody because I think it'll work. It's okay, we're talking about your nervous system and your sensory processing. What does your system need? And I don't know that, and the
Right.
person might not know that until they try a bunch of
Right.
things
Right.
as well, as especially if there's interoceptive stuff, or say they've, for example, for me, I didn't know I was a fidgeter because I've squashed it
Right.
so many years, late diagnosed autistic ADHD, and I shut down my fidgeting. And it's only been in the last 6 months that I've gone, no, actually, I need that extra proprioceptive input to stay focused. If I can be, I've got two, I've got two with me right now. One hard and heavy, one light and soft, just to cover all bases.
Yeah, just in case.
It's this, okay, so that's where I am. And it helps me stay more grounded and present. And, that in socially acceptable ways, that has showed up as taking copious notes in meetings or in classes.
Oh, that's really
That
interesting.
that has been,
That just kind of like
like,
made me go, oh, I feel a bit sane.
yep, or
Yeah.
playing with
Okay.
picking my fingernails, all of those,
Highlighter,
our
highlighter,
socially
highlighter.
acceptable fidgets. It's actually, there's other things, and that maybe pops into, I've been thinking a lot about accommodations recently as well, because just about every client I've spoken to in the last couple of weeks has talked about accommodations, and bringing the sensory piece into whether it's a workplace, a school. I work solely with adults, so it's a lot about workplaces, but it's also accommodations at home. You know, like we built our own. We built a little, I guess, tiny house sleep out kind of thing. There's no ceiling lights.
Oh,
By design. You know, so that's a sensory support for me. I didn't want ceiling lights. I'm quite happy with lamps. And I was designing and we were building our own place. We didn't put ceiling lights in.
absolutely. Oh, I
So
love
there's
that.
all, yeah, so there's this thing like sensory processing in all aspects of our lives, and what do we need to do to prevent getting super overwhelmed, or if we can't prevent it, how can we manage it the best we can? And then if we do go into sensory overwhelm, how can we then re-regulate,
Right.
reground, and come back to what we might need to be doing?
Yeah. Multiple layers. And then that idea of I must hear Casey Davis in my head every day, who wrote the How to Keep House While Drowning. I swear it's like every day. It's been one of the most influential books for me. But it is that idea of the space serving you. And like you said, like I didn't realize how much movement I need. So before this, then too, I did about 20 minutes of some like yoga stuff. And whenever anyone discussed anything around ADHD and how much they move or this or that, I go, doesn't seem relevant to me. Although I worked shifts at a hospital and I never sat down for like 14 hours. And then I was like, what do you even mean? Um, and then moving to public health and not on the floor, that's when it became, I have to have multiple different types of seats. I have to fidget. I have to do some sort of like 10-minute whatever before I get on to talk to someone. Otherwise, I can't think. And it has been where the house now has a lot more just stuff around and baskets around for me to like, I like stretchy bands too. Just to get like really feel that input and just kind of move it around and be really silly with it. But I didn't used to have those things around because it just didn't feel, I don't know, I didn't connect to it. I didn't connect to it. Now they're all over the place.
Yep. And I think it's an important, my brain just jumped to like mindfulness practices as well. Like so often we talk about those practices as being seated and stationary. Well, you can be mindful and move around as well. Or like, so I also deal with chronic pain, chronic fatigue conditions. And so I can't sit up to meditate. I either need to be lying down or moving. Those are my options. And it's like trying to come out of that headspace of, yeah, meditation and mindfulness don't have to be stationary. You can go be mindful and have a walk or move your body or eat something, or in so many, whatever kind of, again, bringing it back to sensory, whatever kind of sensory input you're needing. And just being aware that there's different ways. And I bring that because I also teach. I have a employed job as well as the private practice, and I teach a class. And it's like, yeah, if people need to color in, or they need to sit in different positions, or they need to pop outside for a minute, or like just being, like, I think settings could be doing better at, instead of people having to ask for accommodations, why aren't we just providing different types of seats? And at a meeting, at a workplace, why don't you have a basket of fidgets in the middle of the table?
Yes.
Like, why don't we just do that? And then people don't have to ask for it, and
Yes.
it's just a thing that
Just
that
normalize it.
that
Yeah.
absolutely normalize it. And because there's like, I've got a really lovely necklace made by the Witch, so it's a little like pea pod type thing, and the gemstones move around.
Oh,
Yeah. And I had a fidget ring for about 5 days before I lost it, and really loved that. So you can, there's starting to more of those things. Like if you're not wanting to take something that's obviously a fidget to a meeting, again, I work with adults, so there's I mean, and even with kids too, there's shame and stigma attached to things like this. Like there are, I think I even saw an ad for someone who'd put some of those poppers into the bottom seam of a t-shirt.
yeah, that's going round right now, isn't it?
Yeah. so like there's all these ways that you can bring in different ways of processing, and for some people they need more stimulation and some people need less as well. Some people get really overwhelmed, and those thresholds can be different for different senses as well. Like you might need lots of movement, lots of proprioceptive input, but you might be really sensitive to sound, or
Yes, you read my mind.
you might be okay with one source of sound, but as soon as it's two or three, then
Like,
it's super
oh.
overwhelming. Yeah. And then what if you're too hot? Or what if you're hungry? There's all these things that it's like, a meltdown or whatever can appear to come out of nowhere, but or like, yeah, if I'm feeling grumpy or unsettled, it's like, well, have I eaten something? Have I moved my body? Am I comfortable? Have I worn clothes that are scratchy? There's all these things, and I guess as adults, yes, there's a lot of stigma and stuff, but we also have a bit more choice around our environments. And again, depending, and that's also a privilege. Like I do, it's nuanced and it's complex. It's not just forward, but I don't know. I'd love to give. Well, I do love supporting adults to kind of have that permission to explore and to figure out what works for them and what supports them. And if that's around different kinds of foods that they eat, if that's around how they clean the house, if that's around any self-care routines, what they need at work, any of those things, it's like, well, what's getting in the way and what can we work out? is, is how I kind of approach that. And whether that's sensory or not, it might be executive functioning. I'm seeing a lot of that as well. Um, and I've had conversations with clients. It's like, it doesn't, like, we will work with the symptoms or the behavior or I guess, like, even if people are undiagnosed, or self-diagnosis is totally valid, not everyone can access a diagnosis. um, but in that space, it's like, well, I can work with executive functioning stuff even if there's not a confirmed ADHD going on.
Right.
Executive functioning challenges can come from a whole bunch of different things, and it's okay to need support for that. And I love that you mentioned How to Keep Health While Running, because that book is amazing for kind of giving some of that permission for making the tasks easier, you know.
Yes. The recognition that all these tasks are a million tasks in one. I'm like, oh, that's what it is. You know? I know. Um, yes, I
Yeah.
think
And like, do
I
you
didn't
need
realize. Oh,
to
sorry.
put on pajamas? Yeah. Like, do you need to put on pajamas as soon as you get home so that you're comfy? Well,
Then
I
do it.
mean, does anyone say you can't? Like, just do it. There's like, just there's ways to make our lives easier. And and I deal with my own internalized ableism around a lot of this stuff that I've been unpacking. I've been chronically ill for 10 years, and you know started suspecting neurodivergence a couple of years ago. It's still very new, and unpacking, yeah, just this, like, that it's okay to figure out ways to support myself that make things a bit easier.
Yes.
And also acknowledging the complexity of, if you're living with other people who have different sensory needs to you. You might have a kid or a partner who's a seeker, and you're like, I just need my space. And then it's
Mhm.
like, how do you have those conversations around boundaries and being able to give some aspects, but also, like, one person's sensory needs not necessarily trumping another's.
Yeah.
So that can get really complex. Like, I'm very happy for people to fidget in class and stuff, but if they're doing something that's noisy and distracting other people, well, then we might need to look at there being something different that they're using to regulate themselves, but not dysregulate other people. And I think that's not always a conversation that happens, is that awareness of, like, I might like really low light levels, but if that's impacting what my partner needs to do, well, then we need to talk about how we negotiate that.
Right. Right. I
And
would say
it's trickier
we
with
didn't have
kids.
a lot.
Again, I
Yeah.
don't work with kids, so it's a whole different ball game because they do have needs and they don't necessarily understand.
Yeah, it's such a, even with my two, they're 10 and 7 now. It is an ongoing daily conversation, particularly because the oldest is a much quieter person and really doesn't want lots of noise or unexpected movement. The younger one is all of those things. Um, so it is a way of, from the very first thing in the morning, of how do we get up in the morning and kind of switch that part on has been my goal. So where at least we can start at the beginning of, we do this with you right away and you have this right away. And then it kind of sets up for the day. And I try to
Mm,
have that be on their mind then. It seems to be kind of sitting there a lot more now subconsciously through years and a lot of conversations of, oh, that's right, I might need to do this, so I'm going to step over here and not do it on top of my sibling on the couch. I'll go do it over here, like 10 feet away. And so we have, and again, like that idea of there's just a lot more stuff out for that kid as well, like yoga blocks and wobble cushions, and it purposely to a place away from where the other one tends to want to be. So then they can be meeting it. But I mean, it's a regular thing because, as I said to you, my last few days, I've been very sensory dysregulated myself and having to tell them, like, I have to go in the other room. And then they both really like me. They're always like, where are you going? I'm like, I'm being very serious this time. I really need it. It is not you, it is a me thing. And having to be, but I think with having it, it's just daily as part of the daily ongoing,
mm,
this is what we're doing.
yeah.
What do you need? How do you need to be comfortable? And it becomes just second nature. And like you said, if the things are just out already, or if they know they can always ask for it, for us in our houses, I talk about food a lot, particularly because my second, because there's lots of sensory needs around the food and needing to change what he thought he was going to want. And so if you can ask for that, then getting used to meeting your own needs, tuning into what you need. And I'm hoping then really building that self advocacy, even if they're by themselves, of going,
Mm,
oh, I thought I was going to want this, but actually, I just want to switch my mind. That's
mm,
okay. But it is such
yeah.
an ongoing thing
Mm,
of other people around and what do we do to make sure. I did not want to be telling our younger one all the time of like, be quiet. You need to be quiet, because that's not meeting his need whatsoever and making it as if the other one's need is more important, even though for me too, the noise is hard. But then it
yeah.
becomes, I have on the ear defenders. I can still hear him. He's still safe. I definitely can still hear him. And then he can have music on really loud, drums over here. We can shut a door.
Yeah.
But that has a lot of privilege of, we have 2 rooms downstairs and we can do that. Whereas other families, when I go in, sometimes too, they don't have that extra space. And
Mhm.
that's where we need to get really, really creative. Yeah. Cause
Yeah.
like you said, it's, there's all those details, isn't it? It's all those details. And then, yeah, we have a lot of privilege of 2 rooms downstairs to where we can do that.
Yeah. And that it made me think as well about having a um like having different maybe routines with with the different needs, like say somebody needs movement before bed and somebody else needs downtime. It's like how to manage those two routines and how to fill up the sensory cup or the sensory bucket. um I've got a blog on my website on sensory processing, and it's got that kind of sensory bucket idea. Like some people have like I'm really sound sensitive, so my sensory bucket for sound is really little, like it fills up really fast. And then like my sensory bucket for, well, I won't say touch because I'm a bit sensitive to touch, but like weighted stuff and
Yeah,
feeling kind of
for
grounded,
sure.
my bucket for that's a lot bigger. um and people have different sized buckets in their different senses, and some people also need lots to fill up their bucket so that they can then regulate. So it's this really interesting thing to figure out with people, is like, okay, what do you need to do what's getting in the way. I often use Winnie Dunn's model of sensory processing. So the 4 quadrants where you get sensory sensitive, sensory seeking, low registration, and sensory avoidant.
Hmm.
And you can be different bits for different sense, but it can just give you an idea of, okay, so do I seek out this kind of input? Okay, so how do we capture that? Another resource I really like is Sensory Ladders, because it's so personalizable. It's kind of
Oh,
different levels of, I guess, regulation might be a overarching word, with kind of this optimal zone in the middle. Because some people need more sensory input to be alert. You know, we're talking about fidgeting to be able to stay grounded. That is something that I need to be up in my, I often think of it as green and this kind of optimal level of arousal. But if there's too much input, like if there's lots of different sources of noise, or the lights are too bright, or it's too hot, then I'll go up above that into a yellow, for say, because I kind of think of it like a blue, green, yellow, red. And I'm not talking about zones of regulation either. That's a different that's a different concept. And those are just the colors that make sense for me. But if I was working on making one of these with a client, they would choose their own colors, their own levels. They could break it into more sections. It could be whatever they need it to be, with the idea being, do you need to move up the ladder or move down the ladder, basically? And just, yeah, it's such a fascinating thing to, because people often, it's like, oh, I didn't know that would be that much easier if I just had some earplugs in. I'm like, yeah.
yes.
Or how much, when I got my first pair of noise cancelling headphones, this is before I knew I was neurodivergent. um Game changer. Like, it reduced my fatigue from public transport travel so much. Like, I was living in Melbourne at the time and doing like an hour and a half commute each way to uni when I was doing my OT studies. And oh my God, I tried out a friend's noise cancelling headphones and then bought my own. And I hadn't realized how much the sound was impacting me until I tried something. So there's all these things that we might think, oh, I'll just get by, or it's okay, or oh no, it only bothers me a little bit. And it's like, well, all those little bits add up. And
Right.
especially, a lot of neurodivergent people are dealing with hypermobility, chronic pain, chronic fatigue, whatever other co-occurring things they've got going on. And it's like, well, what if you could make it 1% easier? What if, like I love wearing my loops when I'm driving in the car, because it cuts down the road noise, and it makes it
Oh,
easier to drive. Like, I can still hear everything, I'm still super alert, but I don't have as much of that kind of,
to
that
do
just
that.
ongoing low
Yes.
level noise. So it's all these things. It's like, little things might not make a huge difference by themselves, but if we can kind of add, like, they're additive. Okay.
Definitely.
And there's another graphic I made on sensory jars, and how our jar can be bigger or smaller depending on what's going on. So, if I'm having a day where I've got really high pain and fatigue, I haven't slept well, my jar's going to be real small. So, things that I might be able to ignore, I won't be able to ignore. I'll notice the tag. The noise will be more overwhelming, and it'll be much harder to do anything. Whereas if pain and fatigue's lower, I've had a good night's sleep, and I may be feeling, pretty good. Being chronically ill as somebody else is pretty sick, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
A good day for me, then that jar is heaps bigger. And so something like a scratchy tag, well, I could probably ignore it, but why wouldn't I cut it out?
Anyway. Yeah.
Except for needing the executive functioning to remember to cut it out when it's off
I
my
was gonna say,
body.
where's the scissors? Now I have to
Finding
go
the
across the
scissors and
room, and then I'm gonna notice the papers and that one sheet that I'm still supposed to call about. I know.
which is
I know.
generally still have some tags in my clothes. Anyway,
But
this is But the point being is, well, do you need to deal with the minor irritations? Could
Yeah,
you do something to minimize or reduce or eliminate them, you know? And you
absolutely.
can't always, you know,
Yeah, but the ones you
like if
can.
if you the ones you can,
Oh, I got rid
like,
of the annoying pens. And I know that sounds like silly, but I didn't realize they were making me so angry. And I happened to end up being on a Zoom where I was chatting with Scott Nielsen. I was taking some notes for something we are going to put together. And I just went, if I have to write with this pen one more time, there was all these pens I had bought in a pack to be with something. So I felt like I had to use them. It was like £3 for this pack anyway, but I ended up donating them with some other things at the library. I was like, here you go. And it was like making those little tiny differences of just what's like irking me. And the pens, it's just like I couldn't anymore. So just, you're so right. It's all those little tiny small things. I started working with an OT through the NHS here. I've seen them twice, and I hadn't seen OT for years. And I kind of thought when my time came up with the letter, I thought, I wonder what they're going to tell me, because I feel like I've been trying, I've been really mindful, but I'm going to go since I got the appointment. And it's been amazing. We've gone through some things. I'm like, I didn't even think to rethink that. Just some small things to, again, like work in the kitchen better with joint pain, just little things that I do think on the whole has reduced my pain. Obviously, every day is different, but it's just all these little things. I thought, I can't believe I've been just doing that. It's
yeah.
been really fun.
And
I
we
have
get
another appointment next week. I'm so excited.
Yeah, and we get the same way with sensory stuff. And you know, sensory stuff can contribute hugely to fatigue and pain as well. So it's like, you know, I do, you know, and we're here talking about sensory processing and stuff, but it then links in to everything else. Like sensory processing can impact your sleep, it can impact your food, your movement choices, your environment choices. Like people can be really restricted because of their sensory processing as well. And if it's not accommodated and not respected as a true need, then people learn to gaslight themselves and to squash it down and to mask and all those things, and like, oh, I should be able to cope with this, and why is it so hard for me and not for other people? Why do I collapse when I get home? All those things. It's like, well, because there's this mentality of needing to push through and to toughen up and and all
Resilience.
those things. And
Yeah,
yeah,
the programs of
well,
resilience.
this is the interesting thing, right? Because I chose I chose to call myself the chronically resilient OT for a reason. And that's not, I guess, and I think of resilience, and I think the first blog post I wrote on my website was about this, because I know people have some reactions to the word resilient. I don't think, I don't like the way resilience gets used to can take a hammering.
So
And
I agree
that's
with
often,
you. I think the way
yeah,
it
that's
used to be
often how it gets
discussed
used.
is very different to how it's now being talked to kids who are
Yeah.
who are having anxiety about school. I think, and how
Yeah.
it's being used now doesn't isn't actually truly resilience. It's just you just need to put up with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You need to make things easier for me is
Yeah.
kind
Be
of how it's being
quiet.
used
Don't
a lot.
bring that up. And
Yeah.
there's an expectation to just do without questioning, I think, is then
Yeah.
how I see the
Yeah.
word being resilience being like redefined. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
And I
it's
actually
like, I'm kind
really
of like,
love
well,
your name then, because it brings it back to actually that's not what this
actually
is.
resilience, it's resilient to know when to say no.
Yeah.
It's resilient to know your needs and advocate for them. It's resilient to walk away from a situation. I remember as a teenager, friends of mine were going to watch a scary movie, and I was like, "Oh yeah, so that's cool if you want to watch that, but if you put that on, I'm leaving." They did not believe me, and I left because I know for me, if I watch a scary movie, it stays with me for 20 years
I'll say
sometimes.
forever. I know.
30 even, like probably forever. And I wasn't going to put myself through that. And at other times I have just stayed and put up with things, but on that occasion I was able to go, no, I'm not putting up with this. I'm leaving. And so, but also resilience can be soft. Like resilience is, I'm going to rest. I'm going to honor my needs. I'm going to ask for support. It's not about putting up with and pushing through in my perspective. And it's why I used the word in my Facebook profile and in my registered business name as well as chronic resilience, lived experience, occupational therapy. And I chose it very deliberately for my version of the word resilient, and not in the people can take a hammering and bounce back, because I mean, yes, that's resilience too, but we shouldn't have to experience trauma to be resilient.
Yes. Perhaps we could get you re-recorded like on just this little mini topic and send it out to like all the schools and say like, this is what that word really means. So when you're sending it back that my kid's not resilient in this way, we were asking for an accommodation. He doesn't need to be resilient to sit through this. We just need this little change for him to feel comfortable or for him to access the education. So again, I think exactly what you're saying is resilient to
and look,
ask for that.
there are going to be times that you're uncomfortable and you do have to push through and you're not able to accommodate your own needs, for sure. Like the world is not by any means perfect or generally set up for different needs. In saying that, we can all be doing better. Like like I said earlier, having a box of fidgets on the meeting table in a workplace. It's a simple thing, but it would mean the world to the couple of people in that room who are too scared to use their fidgets. And you might actually find that at the end of the meeting, everyone is playing with something, because everybody struggles to focus in meetings,
right,
regardless of your own. So and that is not me saying everyone's a little bit neurodivergent either. I just want to be really clear, because I'm sure somebody's going to want to be nitpicky about that. But everyone has sensory processing needs, right. And so
everyone
people
them.
might and like, why does it have to be socially acceptable to oh, I'll go to the toilet or I'll take notes? Well, why can't we fidget with something? I'd love. And I think because I work in the adult space, I see quite a different view of this than people who work with kids, where it's, generally it's more okay all the time for kids to be themselves and to express. And I know there's a lot of issues with things not being accommodated in education settings and stuff, but yeah, there's a lot of resources and information out there for kids and sensory processing. And so it's been really interesting to, I guess, solidify some of my own thoughts on the topic and create some resources, and to be talking to other people. And I did a little training it's a little half-hour thing on sensory processing to my colleagues the other day, and just getting it out there for it to be a thing that people just do and know about, and it's not a weird or an odd thing to request.
Yeah. And how welcoming would that space, that Stark boardroom, would look if it had some fidget toys in the middle of it? It feels like you would probably get a more honest conversation at whatever meeting you're going to. It just feels like people would be able to walk into that space and be more comfortable and immediately feel like they could engage. I know that's how I am. You go into those rooms and you think, oh, there's nothing personalized here, because it doesn't help you personalize your experience immediately. Yeah.
Yeah. And could you purchase a few different types of chairs instead of having all of the same chairs that are super uncomfortable? Or like I was recently at an OT conference, and I just sat on the floor for some of the sessions because that's what I needed to do, and and towards the end of the second day, I sat on the floor and like 4 other people joined me. So it's like I was the first one to do that because I'm working on, being able to do those things. And in some situations, you don't need to ask for permission, you just kind of go for it. And then that gave other people permission to do it. So I think if more people are talking about this and we're normalizing the fact that everyone has sensory processing needs, and let's just have some things available, and if we make accommodations not a special thing that take a bazillion hurdles to jump through, yes, let's ask people who already have executive functioning challenges potentially to fill in forms and
All this
ask for all
paperwork.
these things and things that they don't even know they need. That's actually a conversation I'm having a lot at the moment. People want accommodations, but they don't know what. And there's a really wonderful resource from the Neurodivergent Enabler on workplace accommodation function. It's a free paid thing. So just like people don't know what to ask for if they don't know what to ask for. And it's the same with sensory processing. Like if you don't know that noise cancelling headphones are going to be a game changer, you don't know that till you try them. And so it's this, I think that's why I settled on the name Sensory Explorations for the Autistic Revolution page, is that it really is about, we could have used sensory processing, sensory modulation. I didn't want to use sensory integration because I'm not trained in that. So I was like, I probably can't use that word because it's a very specific kind of trademarked word and modality. But sensory explorations kind of gives that permission for it to be for anyone and about anyone. We're all sensory beings and we're all exploring what that means. And it can change on any given day as well. Like some days this is going to feel too heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And some days movement is not what I need. I actually do need stillness. And so acknowledging like everyone's differences, but then also the differences within ourselves, and how that can change and fluctuate depending on what's going on for us at any given moment.
Oh, I love all of this. It's just so fascinating. And again, like it seems like it's such a huge foundation to wellness. And I feel like it's been this huge light bulb moment that I go, how did I get this to this stage and not really investigate this or hear about it in healthcare? Now had I gone to OT, but you just think, gosh, there's so many interactions in the past, professionally or personally, that I would have just done differently had I just known little bits about it. So I hope that's what people get also from that section of the magazine is, more conversations, just more, like I said, explorations for yourself day to day over time. And it's quite fun, really, when you find stuff and it's like this exciting moment and letting yourself just kind of do what you need and take care of yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. And just the little incremental. So I think, we very much welcome submissions on, anything sensory. So if you've got a thing you want to share, please do. I think so I wrote an article called A Day in the Life of My Sensory Processing, which kind of runs through my day and all the different bits of sensory processing at the different points of my day. And just even to think about it like that, like it was overwhelming just writing it out. I was like, oh yeah, no wonder I'm so tired at the end of the day.
It sounds like it would be a whole thesis, doesn't it?
Yeah. But so there's like I've got lots of ideas, and I really want to hear from other people as well, because again, we are all so different in the way we process things. So I really want that page, and there'll be overlaps. There'll be overlaps with well-being and special interests and
Definitely.
so many, or what I think what we're calling it dedicated interests,
Like
and
dedicated interests and passions, I believe.
yeah,
But yeah.
so many overlaps. And so yeah, sometimes it can be hard to tell where the stories fit as well. I know I've heard from Jenny on a few of those things, but just if you want to write about how you experience sensory information and or what's helped you, or like I'd love to have a little tips section of some game changing sensory accommodations that you didn't know about until you tried and were like, oh my god, you know
Oh, that'd be perfect. 'Cause then
just
over time that could become its own little handout, right? And that way we could send that around. Here's some things to, yeah, explore with, investigate. Oh, I love
Yeah,
it.
and being like, again, bringing it back to exploration, self-compassion, and it might not work for you. Like some people can't tolerate over-ear things because of the pressure. Some people can't tolerate in-ear things because of the sensitivity. So it's like any like weighted blankets, like there's so many differences. You're not broken or wrong because weighted blanket didn't work for me. It just means you need something different
Yeah.
you know and so that would be another key thing that I'd love to have come out of this, is that gentle exploration with curiosity and compassion.
Oh, wow. Maybe that's the headline of the section. That's really
Yeah.
beautiful. It's
Might
really,
drop there.
I was gonna say we might need to end on that because I don't think anything better is going to come out. That was beautiful. I'm gonna need to go back and pull that out, but that really is beautiful. And to be fair, I feel like that's what I've heard from you this whole chat is everything is around being gentle, being kind to yourself, allowing yourself to have just moments, but allowing yourself rest, allowing yourself to make changes for yourself, to say no. So it is all that word compassion. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I feel like I learned a lot and I can't wait to see what comes in. And again, yeah, the submissions, we want to hear from like everybody because we're just kind of learning. As we've said a few times in this chat, we're all just learning and only in the first few years of learning about ourselves. So everything is welcome. And I guess we'll just kind of round that out. So thank you so much for joining me well, my morning, your evening, although it's just as dark here in October, England. It's particularly dark today. So I have like all these lights on that'll turn off in just a second to accommodate myself, turn all the lights back off. But thank you so much for joining me this morning. And I can't wait to just hear more and connect more as Autistic Revolution takes off. And thank you to everyone for having
Awesome.
a listen.